Hi Year 7. This is the third video created for this first 5 set of lessons. This video corresponds with Lesson 5, the future and sustainability of tourism. Before we begin the video, I just want to point out that the intention is that you have completed number 1 and number 2 in this post before you view this video clip. So if you haven't already done number 1 and number 2, can I encourage you to stop this video and return to it after you have completed those 2 activities. This video will probably make a little bit more sense to you after you have viewed the websites and completed a fairly straightforward activity about before and after the impacts of tourism. If you have completed number 1 and 2 on this post, let's get into looking at the impact of travel on the future of places. Tourism can have both positive and negative impacts on the places that people visit. In the previous lesson, you probably learnt about the different types of tourism that exist. Some people travel for recreational purposes. Some people travel because they want to really immerse themselves in wilderness travel. And some people travel for ecotourism reasons. Some of the general impacts, both positive and negative, of tourism include employment for local people. This is a positive impact. Because tourists generally require services when they're visiting a particular location, these services are generally provided by the local businesses in the area, and therefore employment can be offered to local residents in that particular tourist destination. Another positive impact includes the exchanging of cultures. When people travel, and I'm sure many of you have been lucky enough to experience this yourself, you know that tourism can lead to a greater understanding between cultures, particularly when tourists engage in local traditions and cultural activities. You might have been lucky enough to visit a place like Fiji and visit a local school, or eat or drink a particular traditional dish from a destination or country that you've been lucky enough to visit. As a result, you've developed a better appreciation of that culture. On the other hand, there are some negative impacts of visiting a particular location. One of the major ones is the overcrowding during peak tourist seasons. Tourism can crowd places which may not necessarily be able to accommodate the inflation of the population during peak times. This is particularly an issue in countries that aren't considered first world countries, that might be poorer or don't have the type of infrastructure needed to support the large numbers of people who are visiting at that time. Another very common negative impact of tourism is environmental damage. Tourists can unknowingly and sometimes knowingly damage the environment which they visit, and sometimes this damage can be irreparable. An example of this might be the effect that tourism has had on the Great Barrier Reef. And if you've done the activity prior to watching this video, you will have seen an example of damage to the Great Barrier Reef due to tourism and visitors over time. I'm going to ask that you pause the video in just a second and complete this really quick little live activity. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a list of a number of different impacts of tourism. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll notice that I've created a little table. What I would like you to do in your geography books is to place each impact of tourism into the correct category box, either positive or negative in the table. So let's have a look at one or two together. The first impact on the list is the preservation of heritage, culture, and local customs. Based on what we read on the previous slide in terms of having a greater appreciation for a culture that you might visit, I think that that first dot point is a positive impact of tourism. Let's have a look at increased crime. Having an increase of people in a particular place can sometimes attract things like pickpocketing or a general increase in crime such as terrorism, which is something that we've experienced in the tourism industry over the last decade. I think it's pretty obvious that an increase in crime would be considered a negative impact of tourism. Now spend 5 minutes, pause the video here, and just see if you can place each of those impacts into the correct category, negative or positive impacts of tourism. When you're ready to move on, you can start the video again. We're now going to have a look at a really quick case study on Venice. And we're going to ask the question, how might the impact of tourism be more negative than positive in Venice? Some of you may have been lucky enough to have visited Venice before. It's an incredible city in Italy, but it is often swamped by tourists, particularly in the summer season. Let's see what some of the negative impacts of this type of tourism and tourist numbers are on Venice.
Venice right now is like a Disneyland. If we don't find a solution, it could be a Machu Picchu, a city with the beautiful marbles, but without a real life, without citizens.
A lot of properties here are being rented out to tourists. I'm nearly 50 and I'm having to share a flat. A lot of local shops, like your butchers, your bakers, your dressmakers, all the local services have been transformed one by one into souvenir shops, tourist restaurants, fast food places. Nothing seems to be catered for us anymore.
It's not only because they bring to the city more than 1.5 million of tourists every year, but you can immediately perceive the fact that they are totally out of scale. So they have become a symbol for the struggle to save Venice.
I don't think anyone in this square is probably from Venice.
It's kind of a double-edged sword because they probably want the money that we bring in, having tourists here, but it's also super crowded and it's probably annoying to have so many people come in every day.
One of the craziest things I've come across here is when people ask me what time Venice closes. That makes you realize that the perception of this town from an outsider is that it is a living museum and that we're just extras.
A couple of really important points in relation to positive and negative impacts of tourism on a particular area are covered in that video clip. You're welcome to watch it again if you want to gain some more information on that case study. But let's look specifically at a couple of other locations that are a little closer to home for us and the impact that tourism is having on their future. The impacts of recreational and wilderness tourism. Travelling for recreation is very common and is probably the reason why you have travelled previously with your families and friends. Some places are extremely popular, and the concentrated number of people visiting in that one spot can have significant impact on the natural and built environments there. For example, a beachfront that once attracted people for its sunshine and clean sandy beaches can all too quickly become overcrowded and polluted if not managed and cared for properly. Here's an image of Maya Bay in Thailand, which attracts 5,000 tourists a day. That was before the Thai government closed the area to allow the ecosystem there to recover. And whilst we've probably seen images of this bay or similar bays in Asia like this before, the amount of tourists and tourist boats that are clogging up this natural ecosystem, I think is pretty obvious to us what type of impact that would be having. The impacts of wilderness tourism. Many tourists are drawn to wilderness areas to experience the natural sights and events. However, an increase in tourists can have a great impact on the natural environment, including disturbances in ecosystems, oil spills, rubbish and waste from cruise ships, the introduction of foreign species, tourists damaging plant life, trampling and taking home natural souvenirs. An image exists on the screen at the moment on the left-hand side, which is oil drums from a tourist ship dumped in Antarctica. Antarctica has increased in their wilderness tourism over the last decade. Prior to this time, it was remainly untouched. I wonder what the future for Antarctica might look like. What does the future of tourism and travel need to be so that we can continue to enjoy the joys of traveling and experiencing the natural and human environments that are so different to the ones that we live in? The concept of ecotourism is something that's really important here. Ecotourism is tourism that interprets the natural and cultural environment for visitors and manages the environment in a way that is ecologically sustainable. You might have heard the term carbon footprint and the amount of carbon that is emitted from flying in an aeroplane. New designs in aircraft these days are aiming to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that come from flying in an aircraft. There is also an increase in eco-lodges and eco-resorts around the world. One day you might be lucky enough to stay off the grid in a beautiful glamping-style hut that doesn't necessarily run off electricity or coal power. Everything is natural. Solar power, no TV, no internet, but an opportunity to really be immersed in the natural environment. These are some examples of the steps that the tourist industry are taking to build tourism into the future as ecologically sustainable. What does tourism of the future look like? We certainly hope that there's some space tourism in there at some point along the line, and you might get an opportunity to make sandcastles out of moon sand. But these are probably the more common trends that we're going to see in tourism in the future. Trend 1. More people are travelling, and more people will travel more often. And I think after the current state of affairs with our tourist industry and the fact that tourism has pretty much ground to a halt for us at the moment, everybody is going to be really enthusiastic to go back and travel the world again. Hopefully, they'll have a different appreciation and gratitude for the environment and the culture in that area because we've been forced to stay away for so long. Trend 2. There's going to be an increased awareness of environmental issues and a push towards the idea of ecotourism. Trend 3. Travellers are going to want to continue to experience real cultural, natural, and adrenaline opportunities in their travel. That means the tourism industry are going to have to ensure that they're giving travellers authentic experiences when they travel. And that gives a really good pathway into ensuring that ecotourism is also happening as well. Because a big part of ecotourism is being respectful to the culture and the natural environment of that particular destination. Other trends may include trips might become shorter, but tourists might spend more money to either get there or spend more money when they are there, and that can have a positive economic benefit for the area. Twice as many people now book their travel online rather than use a travel agent. And I'm sure that's something that you've commonly seen your parents or family members do. There are so many travel websites, and internet research is so much easier these days to book and organise travel. There is going to be growth in the number of tourists from Asia to Australia. And prior to this time, it was actually larger than any other region in the world. That's probably something that will continue into the future as one of our closer neighbours. There's also going to be an increased demand for accessible tourism for those with a disability. And that's partly tied into the idea of ecotourism and equal and accessible opportunities for everybody, both tourists and locals. So what do you need to do next? Now that we've drawn to the end of the video clip, I want you to go back to the post in the Google Classroom that is titled Lesson 5, The Future and Sustainability. I want you to just make sure that you have completed Activity 1 and 2, which is using the sliding photograph websites, and having a go at the impacts of tourism worksheet before and after. Before the video ends, I do just want to talk to you a little bit about the third activity, which you're going to do after viewing this video clip, because it involves doing 1 or 2 extra things so that you can play it properly. If we go back to our Google Classroom and we scroll down to the third and final activity attached, which is called Ecotourism PowerPoint Game, full download required. To fully play this PowerPoint game about ecotourism, you need to download this PowerPoint onto your laptop desktop or onto your laptop drive. Just a reminder about how to do that. If you go up to the 3 dots at the top right-hand corner of the screen and open the PowerPoint in a new window, the PowerPoint will appear again, and you'll notice that there's a download icon at the top right-hand corner of the screen now. If you click that download icon, you should be given an opportunity to download the PowerPoint game onto your desktop or to your drive. You may also be able to just open it straight away. If you do have an opportunity to open it and play it, you are welcome to do that. And as you're playing through the game, as long as it is in the PowerPoint program, you actually will have an opportunity to physically press and play the game as it is requested of you. Have a bit of a go at that, and hopefully you enjoy playing that game and you learn a bit more about tourism and ecotourism. Just make sure that you have downloaded the PowerPoint game onto your drive and into your computers first, so that you can fully play the game as it's intended. Otherwise, you'll only be able to go through the slides and it's not going to be very fun. Thanks, Year 7. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and you've gained some information about the future of sustainable tourism.